look at nuclear terrorism, and let's put it on the agenda, forefront. Because as a world, we have an opportunity here to move forward in freedom or to retreat into the darkest days, such as the Roman Empire went through. We do not need to proceed to the ash heap of history. We have freedom in our hearts. There are many Iranians who have freedom in their hearts, and I applaud Aryo in his brave lawsuit to put his name forward and to advance this agenda. And Senator Kerry, thank you for saying in your first debate with President Bush that you wanted to give nuclear fuel to Iran. In the last couple of weeks in this presidential campaign, please explain yourself, Senator Kerry. Why should we do this? Why does it make sense? Let's have a debate on the issue. I'd like to thank you all for being here on WorldNetDaily.com, on the various shows, including Joseph Farah's radio show, on Radio America, and others around the country that will have us. We're going to be bringing this message forth to the American public over the course of the next few months. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Corsi. For purposes of disseminating information to you all as quickly as possible, we have established a website that really pertains to the litigation that I've mentioned. It is regimeinfluence.com. It's up now. You're welcome to and encouraged to visit there. I'd like to give a moment to Mr. Kenneth Timmerman, if he'd like to say a few words.
Good morning. My name is Kenneth R. Timmerman, Timmerman. I'm here to give you some resources and a bit of factual background, not just on this case, but in particular on the influence operation by the Islamic Republic here in the United States. I've been working as an investigative reporter on Iran for about 20 years. I began in Paris interviewing exiles in the early 1980s. Came here in 93 to work on the Hill. In 1995, I launched a foundation called the Foundation for Democracy in Iran. One of our board members at that time is now serving at the Defense Department as an assistant secretary. It's absolutely clear to me that there is a influence operation by the Islamic Republic here in the United States. The goal is to create a fifth column. The goal is to create a fifth column in America to begin with within the Iranian-American community. This is a very, very serious thing that is going on. It is similar to what the Soviets did during the Cold War. Now, I'd like to give you a few resources. I have some documents which those of you who are interested, I will hand out. The documents pertain to Susan Akbakpour and to Hassan Namazi. I also have some pictures which are available on the website as well as here, showing the relationships between Mr. Kerry and Mrs. Akbakpour and also Hassan Namazi. They have been very closely tied through an organization called the American-Iranian Council. In the early 1990s, the Iranian regime used one-man lobbying shops. Their influence operation was a bit rudimentary. They masqueraded as Iranian-American cultural associations. After that, they poured money into U.S.-based television operations aimed at flooding the Iranian community here with regime propaganda. But in the mid-1990s, about the same time I set up the Foundation for Democracy in Iran, they had a brainstorm. Why not use the lobbying power of large U.S. corporations to sway the public debate in this country to their benefit? Now, the organization that was then set up, called the American-Iranian Council, you can find their website, it's american-iranian.org, is the brainchild of a pro-regime individual named Houshang Amir Ahmadi, A-M-I-R-A-M-A-D-I, Houshang Amir Ahmadi. He claims to teach urban studies at Princeton University, but in fact spends most of his time shilling for the Islamic Republic and their agenda here in the United States. Mr. Namazi, against good judgment and against counsel from his friends, including myself, joined the board of the American-Iranian Council. He served on that board for well over a year, and I believe that one of the reasons that he gets associated with the pro-regime agenda in this country is because of his own behavior in joining that board. AIC's goal from the very start has been crystal clear: lifting U.S. sanctions on Iran and promoting the resumption of trade and diplomatic ties between the United States and Iran. That is the agenda of the Islamic Republic. Why is that their agenda? Because their economy has been crippled by U.S. sanctions. U.S. sanctions that are often decried in this country have actually prevented foreign investment to rebuild the Iranian oil industry, which itself is rusting because of the mismanagement of the clerical regime. U.S. sanctions, while unilateral, and while they could be better if we could get our European partners to forego multi-billion-dollar contracts in Iran, are yet, nevertheless, they are very effective. And they have had a powerful effect on the Iranian economy. Mr. Namazi, the American-Iranian Council, have been instrumental in trying to convince major corporations and members of Congress to lift the sanctions on Iran. They even have a project, and you can find this on their website, which they're trying to raise over $500,000 for to fund. It's called, quote, Building Better U.S.-Iranian Relations. Now just think about that for a second. The Islamic Republic of Iran murders Americans around the globe. They've murdered Americans in Beirut. They've murdered Americans in Jerusalem, in Gaza. They're murdering Americans today in Iraq. And yet the AIC, on whose board Hassan Namazi served, is raising money to explore how we get closer to those same mullahs who are ordering those murders of Americans. Now, I've got a number of resources which you can find on my website, which is kentimmerman.com. There are articles that I've written in the American Spectator, which is out this month, called Dirty Mullah, and in Insight Magazine, a weekly investigative magazine of the Washington Times, about the fundraising operations here in this country. Let me just tell you a few highlights from those articles. I want to give you some background about a woman named Susan Akbakpour, A-K-B-A-R-P-O-U-R. Now, Susan was in that picture I showed you earlier with John Kerry. Here she is. Okay, this is at a fundraiser where she and Hassan Namazi were on the organizing committee inviting John Kerry as the top speaker in June of 2002 in San Francisco. Susan came to this country in 1997 claiming to be a political refugee. She claimed that if she went back to Iran, she would be subject to persecution. In fact, and this is one of the documents I have for those of you who are interested, Susan Akbakpour was an employee of the Islamic Republic of Iran before she came to this country, and this is the document that will prove it. These are the kind of people who are working with John Kerry's campaign. Mr. Namazi has raised over $500,000 for the campaign. Susan Akbakpour and her husband, Faraj Alaei, have raised close to $100,000 each, according to the campaign. I understand that it is illegal in the United States to make campaign contributions if you are not a U.S. citizen or if you are not a green card holder. Well, Ms. Akbakpour contributed to Mr. Kerry's campaign on June 17th, 2002, and you can pull this down from the FEC website, when she was not a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. How do I know this? Ms. Akbakpour told me so. She told me so. And you can see that again in the article from Insight Magazine. She acknowledged that she did not have a green card until after she married Faraj Alaei last year, 2003. And other sources tell me she does not have a green card yet. Now, it's illegal. It is frankly illegal, clearly illegal to make campaign contributions when you are not a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. Susan Akbakpour has broken the law. Mr. Kerry's campaign has broken the law. And they should know that, because I have made this public. I made this public first in March of this year. There is no excuse. The Kerry campaign has not distanced themselves from this illegal fundraiser. Now, I am also told by immigration attorneys that it is illegal for a foreign individual to come to this country pretending political persecution, and in fact to be a former employee in good standing with that regime. Susan Akbakpour has been filmed at pro-democracy demonstrations in California, haranguing the demonstrators, supporting the regime, and she claims to be a political refugee from this regime. This is the type of person who is supporting Mr. Kerry. This is the type of person who Mr. Kerry has been willing to associate himself with at fundraisers, and I call on Mr. Kerry to distance himself from Susan Akbakpour, from Hassan Namazi, and all of those people that they are working with to raise money who are here to shill for the Islamic Republic. Thank you.
But before we take any questions, I want to make sure you all understand there is no formal affiliation of any kind between our litigation and these distinguished writers who have volunteered to be here and speak their thoughts. We are very grateful for any contributions they can make. We're not paying them, and they're not paying us. I think we just maybe see things the same way. So with those statements, are there any questions that I could entertain? Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering, could we clarify the status of Mr. Piroznia's citizenship in this country and to what extent he's participating politically?
Since there's not a microphone there, I will restate the question. You want to know if Mr. Pirouznia is a citizen of the United States, maybe registered to vote, et cetera. Aryo, you want to?
While being grateful to America, I am not a citizen of America. My wife is American citizen. I could have opted for obtaining my immigration status through her. I refused to do so till about 2 years ago because then I had to travel for political purposes. But I'm grateful that I am here on a temporary residentship with authorization of work and employment.
Yes, sir.
One moment, please. We got to get this for the audio feed, so I'll hand the microphone to everybody.
I'm Jim Loeb from the Interpress Service. I wanted to ask exactly, could you explain, first of all, what the basis of both the defamation, the specific basis of the defamation suit was, and then the counterclaim? And also, is the Student Movement Coordinating Committee for Democracy in Iran, is that incorporated in the United States? And if so, what's its status as a nonprofit or whatever? And does it have a board of directors? Because I've looked at the site and I can't find any board. If you could clarify those issues.
Let me start, Jerry, you might want to grab the microphone. Let me start with the litigation, and to the extent that I give an incomplete response, the pleadings in that case are actually posted on that website at regimeinfluence.com. The defamation claim, that's the $10 million claim filed by Hassan Namazi in March, in Houston, Texas, actually, claims that he was defamed because Mr. Pirouznia's website, the SMCCDI website, made a statement to the effect that he was an agent for the regime. I don't know if they're trying to literally interpret the word agent. Well, literally is not the right word, but maybe overinterpret the word to mean that there was an accusation that he was on the payroll or that he was an agent in the sense of an agent for change. I shouldn't speak to that. That's really a question more appropriately suited to Mr. Namazi and his attorneys. I will tell you that we are defending that lawsuit in part on the basis of truth. We believe there is a link between Mr. Namazi and the regime. Unfortunately, we've been thwarted in our ability to conduct discovery by Mr. Namazi's refusal to appear for deposition until ordered to do so, and by the Kerry Campaign's stonewalling and refusal to even call us back. Now, as to the
We have a follow-up question.
The existence of a link is one thing. The question of an agent, which does have certain connotations, is another. And so I want you to be as specific as possible about the nature of that link, and perhaps to expand the question to the other panelists, Mr. Timmerman and so on. If they are saying that Mr. Namazi is an agent of the Islamic Republic, because I know you talked about Susan and so on, but you didn't talk about Mr. Namazi, and I want the presenters to be as specific as possible about their allegations with respect to Mr. Namazi in particular.
I appreciate your need for specifics, and I wish that I could give more. For two reasons I cannot. Number one, I'm happy to talk freely about Ms. Akbarpour's links because I'm not the lawyer in that case. Discovery has been thwarted and is ongoing in the Namazi case. So there's a lot that I can't say. In other words, I have meaningful suspicions that I believe are well-grounded about exactly the nature of the link between the regime and Hassan Namazi, but I haven't been able to prove them. And so I'm very reluctant and really must kind of refuse, regretfully, to expand on that very much. But I also want to say that I do not accept the premise of your question, that there must be a link. Look up agent in Webster's. It's not a legal term when a non-lawyer uses it on a political op-ed website. Mr. Namazi is an agent for the Iranian government to the extent that he is promoting the Iranian regime's agenda, period. Now, with respect to your question about the structure of SMCCDI, it is incorporated, correct, Mr. Pirouznia? Is it nonprofit?
We have missed the resources in order to push on, but on plans.
Now, just real quick, is it incorporated?
No.
It's not yet incorporated.
It's incorporated.
It is incorporated. It is not a nonprofit. Does it have a board of directors?
Yes, they are people that they are managing SMCC.
I am not going to provide that right now, sir. And the reason is I don't want those people to be, called in to give depositions in this case. Now, if it's a matter of public record, it's a matter of public record, but I'm not going to disclose those identities.
The other panelists want to respond on the question of agency, and whether that's the allegation that Mr. Namazi is a presumably knowing agent of the Islamic Republic.
I don't know if there's enough information to make a legitimate claim that Mr. Namazi is an agent in the sense of paid by, working for the Islamic regime, and I won't make that claim. I think it may be a type of claim that hopefully can be investigated, and the deposition may be an opportunity to get more information addressing that issue. Ultimately, it may be the type of issue that would require the powers of the Homeland Security Department or the FBI to answer fully, because you are raising issues of conditions of employment, transfer or passage of money, and I don't know whether we'll be able to address those with the limited investigative powers that we have. That question may not ever be resolved unless it were an investigation with more authoritative law enforcement powers. Now, I want to second what Bob Genevine just said, and that is what we are noticing and what we are seeing is that the pro-Iranian lobby in the United States, according to the Federal Election Commission records and Senator Kerry's own website, include individuals like Hassan Namazi who have contributed significant money to John Kerry's campaign. And we notice in John Kerry's campaign that he has adopted positions that would be favorable to the mullahs in Iran. And those positions include his statement in the first debate with President Bush when he said he would give nuclear fuel to Iran to see if they would misuse it. So it's the basis of that type of support by Senator Kerry that we're pressing for answers on. And we're taking the position, I'm taking the position, that politically, regardless of whether Mr. Namazi is or is not an agent of the Islamic regime in any formal sense, politically, however, I'm objecting to the issue that we should ever allow Iran, with its current mullah leadership, to become nuclear. I'm objecting politically to the lack of freedom in Iran, with the same mullahs that for 444 days kept American diplomats hostage in our embassy. And it took President Reagan coming into office to get them freed. President Carter could not get them out of captivity. I don't want to see us return as a nation to a situation where an atomic Iran could hold us hostage for oil, or could hold a nuclear threat over the head of Israel. And those questions are not dependent on whether Mr. Namazi or anyone else is or is not an agent of the Islamic regime. So when we're going to investigate this, we're going to look very carefully at the political positions being taken here and try to raise the issue on the agenda of the American people, saying, first, while this election yet lasts, ask the question of Senator Kerry to explain why we would give nuclear fuel to Iran. And secondly, let's continue pressing this argument politically so that we can have the American people evaluate clearly the risks that could be faced should any rogue regime, in Iran specifically, with terrorist objectives that are clearly documented, including the documentation that came forward from the 9/11 Commission, have nuclear weapons and put the world at risk with those nuclear weapons. I think it's a severe threat and one we need to raise. So that's what Atomic Islam, my book, is going to focus on.
Thank you, Dr. Corsi. We have a question here from Jeff Gannon, White House correspondent for Tehran News.
Thank you. Have you looked into whether John Kerry or his close associates might profit from normalizing relations with Iran? I say this because I know when he pressed for normalization of relations with Vietnam, his close family members did profit as a result of that.
Yes, as much as possible. It was John Kerry who said, quote, "I will be prepared early on to explore areas of mutual interest with Iran, just as I was prepared to normalize relations with Vietnam a decade ago." The AIC, the American Iranian Council that Mr. Timmerman spoke about, was funded in large part by major American oil companies. I think there's an obvious, unmistakable economic opportunity if diplomatic relations with Iran are normalized and those markets are opened up for American businesses. I think anyone who has positioned themselves in the doorway to that new market stands to make a lot of money. Now, I've told you everything I know about it, and to the extent, this is something we are eager to talk about with Mr. Namazi on Monday. Until now, we haven't been able to investigate it. Lastly, I did not answer the second part of your question, sir, which went to the counterclaim. The counterclaim is simply this, that the lawsuit is frivolous. This is a defamation claim. And you may or may not know that Mr. Hassan Namazi was nominated by President Bill Clinton to be an ambassador for Argentina, but that nomination collapsed after Forbes magazine wrote an expose on Mr. Namazi that detailed some of his business dealings. That article is posted at the regimeinfluence.com website, and here's the relevance to our litigation. You can't defame someone who already has a very poor reputation. Defamation is a relative term. I think it's a frivolous lawsuit. Anybody else need to respond to the question regarding the markets or the economic opportunities? Okay.
We have a question here from the back.
Hi, I'm Laura Rosen. I'm a freelance journalist. Mr. Corsi, you said in the course of researching your book you were put in touch with Mr. Pirouznia. Can you say who gave the introduction?
That's very easy. Mr. Pirouznia called John O'Neill, said, "John, I need a lawyer." And he evidently, from the prominence John was getting with the Swift boats, thought maybe John O'Neill could direct him to someone or would take the case on himself. John was too busy with the Swift Boat veterans. John called me, said maybe you'd have an interest. I did. In my background, I've done extensive work on anti-war movement, political protest in the United States, and terrorism. So I've had a deep interest in Iran for a long time. It was over the Iranian hostage event and the aftermath, I published a major article on predicting the outcomes in terrorists. I developed a computer model to do it, published it at Yale. And the Reagan administration, while the hostages were being released and that situation was unfolding, a top secret clearance with the Agency of International Development, the State Department, and I counseled on hostage survival techniques. So I've had a deep interest for a long time in Iran and this issue. And I called Aryo and said, tell me about your case. And in the process of that, I decided that I would first consult with Aryo, and second, write a book on it. So that's how that all happened.
Right here, sir.
We have a question coming from the front row here. Go ahead.
Wes Vernon, Newsmax.com. I'm wondering if you could give a little more detail on your efforts to try to get some comment from the Kerry Campaign. Who are the people you contacted? Who told you that there would be no comment or that they declined to comment? And so on.
I'll be happy to do that. My first initiative was on September 9th, 2004. I sent by Federal Express a letter to Rand Beers. Rand is one of the senior foreign policy staff members of the Kerry Campaign. And Mr. Beers is the person at the campaign who spoke with Kenneth Timmerman earlier this year and authenticated the email that the Kerry Campaign sent out that ended up in the hands of the Iranian regime. A very conciliatory, we need to make friends with old enemies and that kind of thing email. That FedEx went out on September 9th. I got no response. One of the senior, in fact, he may be the director of the Kerry Campaign Finance. I know he was the finance chairman for John Edwards, is a former lawyer in Dallas who I know personally. And so I called him at the campaign to ask him if he could help. His name is Fred Barron. He was as helpful as I think he could be from his department. He did return my call, told me that I would need to talk to Rand Beers. I said, okay, can you give me a telephone number and maybe a fax number? So that was on September 16th. Immediately, I sent another fax to Mr. Beers.